this year we finally got to see, or at least in game one, what that defense looks like when he has the pieces that he needs. And that starts with those edge rushers. I mean, you go from Nick Perry, Clay Matthews, Reggie Gilbert, and Tyler Fackrell, three of those players of which were my three lowest graded players on defense last year, to Preston, Zadarius, Rashawn Gary, and then obviously still Fackrell. I mean, the upgrade there is insane. And then same thing at safety. I mean, you go from Clinton Dix, who they traded away. They wanted to get out of him playing back there. Kentrell Bryce is no longer in the league. And they go from those two to, again, Adrian Amos and Darnell Savage. And you go from a situation where you're just trying to tread water at safety to actually making impact plays and people flying around the football. And we just saw two huge increases in the level of play at those two positions.
That's
yep.
Like music
nailed it right on the head for defense, yeah. The Smith brothers, I was reading, what was it, the 17 total pressures and QB hits combined between the Smith brothers by themselves?
Yeah, and these are not bad offensive tackles. It's not like,
No.
Leno and Bobby Massey aren't exactly, all pro caliber offensive tackles, but these are two really solid professional football players who've played in this league for a very long time. They are very good players. You've really done a good job of keeping Mitch Trubisky in this offense on schedule, not giving up a ton of plays like that. So to consistently attack them and attack that offensive line as a whole, Cody Whitehair just got that huge contract. Daniels at center was a big pick last year, and then of course, Kyle Long as well. This is not some injury-riddled offensive line. They attacked a strong core group of that Bears offensive line, and they won.
And just to piggyback what you were saying earlier about the defense and the big three and then adding Savage, just as a side note, I think like even Montravius Adams, and Lancaster and those guys all that came in, even when the few snaps that Rashawn Gary came in, the stunts and twists that he played in the games he played caused havoc and caused somebody to be in the face. So even the guys that were limited, they did exactly what you wanted guys that are limited snaps. They made impacts or actually did their job to help another player make an impact while they were in there instead of just being a weak point, like you said. And that's something that's a huge aspect of this team. The depth and the play of the depth during that game was very impressive that we have not seen in past years.
100%. Inside linebackers missing some depth, but hopefully when Oren Burks comes back, they get a little bit more of that. But outside of that, they've got depth everywhere else, and you saw it on Thursday.
Well, I'm actually excited because we might see a little bit of B.J. Goodson on next Sunday, and I'm kind of excited for that because he was actually a higher-rated coverage linebacker, and that's what we were lacking when Burks was out.
Yeah, I know he rated better in coverage. When I went and watched him, he's a little bit more of a thumper, and I think they're going to use him as a little bit more of a run stopper. I know he, had some. I think he had a couple interceptions in one game last year, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how they use him. I'm honestly not sure, just based off of last week. Let's not kid ourselves. I think they very much went into last week believing that Chicago was going to try to do a lot in the run game with David Montgomery, and Cohen, and Mike Davis. And they were totally fine with Raven Green playing that linebacker position, and he was fantastic. So I don't think that his position's going anywhere anytime soon. I think he's going to see the vast majority of the snaps at that position. But, if Minnesota goes into a game plan where they're running the ball 30-plus times again, and, Kirk Cousins is only throwing the ball 10 times like he did last week, then, I think we might see some B.J. Goodson and try to set the tone a little bit at that linebacker position, just every now and again, maybe to change things up and put a little bit more strength on the field.
Well, there's a name that I thought I was going to hear tonight from you, was Blake Martinez. He's one of my favorites, and he's always seems to be in the mix on every play.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm about 25, plays in from a grading standpoint. Liked how he played, just again watching on the condensed version and obviously the game live and afterwards. But
yep.
I thought he made the nice play in the sack, although that's an unblocked blitz right up the middle. You would hope that the linebacker would make that play, but I saw him. There was a play, maybe play 20 somewhere in there on defense, where one of the things that he did that he struggled with in his career, he had an offensive lineman that got out on him, and he staffed and shedded that linebacker and went and helped make the play. I don't think he actually finished it. I think somebody beat him to it, but just the fact that he was able to stack and shut that offensive lineman and get to the football, that's really the last thing. And the two things. The two things that Martinez needs to do with consistency to go from a really solid, nice linebacker to take that next step and really be a stud is that exact thing. And then just finally figuring out a way to get those big turnover type plays, which is something he's kind of been allergic to in his career. So we saw the ability to stack and shed. We saw the sack. We saw him be aggressive and kind of all over the place, like you said. Now that the last thing, hopefully, is that he starts getting some of those turnovers coming his way.
And just
he has weapons around him now. Before he didn't.
Well, yeah, and just
that's going to pay a huge difference.
The one
I agree with that.
One thing I noticed right away that I always say when people are, and it's not that I'm down on middle linebackers, but my theory, and it's always been kind of proven, is that the middle linebackers, they can be tackling machines, but it's where are those tackles? And Blake was a solid player, like you said, but those tackles were always downfield. And my argument was, I'm not blaming Blake, but a middle linebacker is only going to be as good as the play up front. And if the play up front is constantly letting a 300-plus pound lineman get upfield and bounce him, he's not going to win that battle very often, and especially when you get wore out. Yesterday, or that Thursday game, right away, and watching it several times over, right away what flashed to me about Blake Martinez in this front was he was clean and able to diagnose and make the right decisions, and sometimes even be wrong and still be able to make the right, and help finish the play at least. It was because of that front he is going to be able, in my opinion, to take that step that you're saying, because he's going to have an ability to be much more clean and diagnose things without having big uglies up in his face pushing him around and wearing him out early in games.
Yeah, you talk about a focal point of the defense, and we can talk about all the new players, and we can talk about the guys playing behind him, but Kenny Clark, it starts everything kind of
Superman.
Right around. Yeah, he's kind of the sun that every other defensive player rotates around, and when he's dominating on the interior, the center of that defense, right in the center of the offensive line, that he's taking on these blocks and causing pressure and wreaking havoc, it just sets up the rest of the defense for a ton of success. And dude's just out of it. There's literally almost one or two plays every single game that I watch out of Kenny Clark that I just literally laugh at what he does. For example, there was a play this game where he literally takes the center. It's a stretch play, and he's trying to run, kind of stay with the play. He takes the center, just literally throws him to the side. Next blocker comes and gets him. He literally just throws him to the side and then goes in and helps make the play. I mean, it's just freak strength, and it's so fun to watch. I would recommend to anyone, if ever you have a chance, if you're watching on a Sunday, maybe the Packers are up by 14 or down by 14, and you're discouraged or you're excited and you just want to do something different, legitimately just watch Kenny Clark for a game and just keep your eyes on him, because it's so fun and so worth it.
Okay, quick question. If Kenny Clark continues on the trajectory he's clearly still on after watching him Thursday night, is there a possibility, because he plays in a 3-4 in that zero technique position, which is much, he's asked to take on and do much more than like a 3 technique. Is there a point in this season where if he's playing like this in a 3-4, doing what he's been doing, that we start to talk about him surpassing Aaron Donald as the best defensive tackle in the league?
I do not, and I think that's the tough part for Kenny Clark right now. Is it's as crazy and maybe as blasphemous as this may sound in Packer country, there's a chance that he may have not even been the best defensive tackle in that game on Thursday, because Akeem Hicks is an absolute monster. Fletcher Cox is a beast for Philadelphia. Chris Jones in Kansas City is amazing.
Yep.
Of course, you have Aaron Donald. Brady Jarrett had a monster game. We are living in a golden age of defensive tackles right now, and I don't know exactly how many people quite know that. There are a ton of just tremendous defensive tackles in the NFL right now. Even guys like Jonathan Allen in Washington. Geno Atkins, of course, in Cincinnati. I mean, the list just goes on, and I think that's the tough part of when you look at Green Bay defense from a season ago, and you can say, well, yeah, you've got Kenny Clark, but every team has a player that maybe isn't as good as Kenny Clark, but at least is in kind of the stratosphere as a player like that, just because there's so many really good ones out there right now. So he's great. He is so fun to watch. He's fantastic, but I don't put him in that upper echelon quite yet, but it doesn't matter. He's so ridiculously good that comparing those players, and to be fair, Aaron Donald and Kenny Clark are two totally different players. So, it's not exactly apples to apples, but who's first and who's fifth and who's seventh? Green Bay has a hell of a defensive tackle, and I'm excited that he's on the team.
I like that.
What's scary is Kenny Clark's not even in his prime yet, boys. He's only 23.
Yeah, it's just insane.
Jay and I can't stop raving about that. He's only 23, and he's not even in his prime.
That's what
Just imagine in 3 years how he's going to be.
Yeah, that's what gives me about him, Andy, is when I sit here and I'm analyzing him, I'm thinking, this kid's just a stud. And then it dawns on me, he's in his fourth year, and he's 23. And then that just blows my mind, like, he's got so much more years before he's even considered to be really in his prime. It's just wow. That's what kills me about this kid. And then you listen to him and watch him around the area, and I know you're closer to him. His off the field personality and how he carries himself as a professional is second to none. It's awesome. It's like he's a full package young man, and he's 23. Blows my mind.
Yeah, and he was nice enough to come on the Pack-A-Day podcast earlier this year. Super stand-up guy, super awesome. And, kudos to him. I asked him straight up. I said, who's the player to keep an eye on having a breakout offseason that the Packer fans need to know? This was before Mike Daniels was released, and he said Montrevious Adams without hesitation. And that certainly seems to be appropriate so far. Adams has looked really good through game one and really through preseason and camp as well.
Looks like Pettin got that negative reinforcement working just fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, bouncing back to the offense, a lot of fans I've seen are kind of freaking out saying, oh, we should have taken a wide receiver in the first round, or we should have grabbed Hawkinson, or it's just that they're starting to overreact a little bit, in my opinion. Do you think the Packers fans have a right to overreact a little bit, knowing we're still in the first set of our offensive install with the floor? I mean, we didn't play in preseason with starters. Do you think they're overreacting, or do you think they need to kind of wait a little bit and see what happens?
Yeah, I mean, this is always, Monday morning quarterback, and the hot takes have to be in right away. And it's always really tough to let this stuff breathe. And, I think a lot of Packer fans had high expectations. There were a lot of Packer fans that thought this offense was, simply bad because of Mike McCarthy, and moving on from Mike McCarthy and getting a new offensive coordinator with some new, fresh ideas was going to be exactly what was needed for this offense. And I don't think it's ever quite that easy. And, whether whatever their personnel is and whatever the coaching staff is, there's still a lot of work to be done on this offense. And I think we're going to know a lot more, after the Minnesota game. Is this something that, continues? At the end of the day, this is arguably, and maybe not even arguably, I think it is going to be their toughest defensive opponent all year. Not only just the talent that Chicago has, but week one, on the road, hostile environment, kickoff game, everyone's watching. That's a really tough environment to go into when you're playing with your very first offense and your first time having a offensive coordinator, kind of go through the motions with everything. That's less than ideal for your first game scenario. And it's not like it's a ton easier with Minnesota, but now you're in the confines of Lambeau. You're going to be able to hear the cadence and the audibles and everything like that a little bit better. I would expect, obviously, a better performance than 200 yards and 10 points that we saw this last week, but this is going to be a work in progress. I think there's going to be things that continue to be an issue. To be fair, we didn't see anything in training camp, in the practices against the Texans, in the preseason games, and now in week one against Chicago. That would show that there's anything that this running game is ready to take off and explode and really get going, which is such a key aspect of this system. So I think that's first and foremost something that has to get going. And then number two, the Aaron Rodgers kind of mechanics to an extent. So we saw some of those same issues, kind of rear their ugly head, unfortunately. Actually, a statistic just came out that he was actually the least accurate quarterback of any of the starting quarterbacks from this first week in the NFL. And, people were saying, well, he had a 60-some% completion percentage, but it's not always just that. If you take a look at the wide open play to Trevor Davis, Trevor Davis is wide open, middle of the field. There's nobody around him. There's nobody around Aaron Rodgers, and that's a ball that's at Trevor Davis's feet that he has to go down and get, and then kind of then stand up and try to get yards after the catch. There was another one to Jimmy Graham where he's running in stride, and it's 5 yards right in front of Aaron Rodgers, no pressure,